first live cook along. Now, if you haven't ever done this before, let me give you a little bit of advice about how we're going to do it. We're going to cook it all together, but you really need to have your ingredients out. So let's go over the basics. Tonight, we're making two different dishes. We're making the seafood soup, the one that's based on Caldo de Siete Mares from the Gulf side of Mexico. We'll talk more about that in just a second. But I sent out three different options for you. You could make it with the seafood, you could make it all vegetable, or you could make it with chicken. So hopefully you've chosen which direction you're going to go now, but they're going to start with the same base. And for that base, you're going to need your garlic, and it needs to be peeled already. So if you haven't peeled it, then start that process now. We have a can of tomatoes, a can of chipotles in adobo, some potatoes, the boiling potatoes here. I've got those. If you're making the vegetable version, you want a couple of zucchini or calabacitas, a couple of carrots or a carrot and a parsnip. You need some herb to do this with. I'm going to make the base with epazote, but a lot of you will probably be using some cilantro for that. Of course, if you're making the seafood version of it, you want your shrimp already peeled and deveined, and then you want your mussels to go in there as well. I'll tell you why I've chosen all these things as we go along. Now, for garnish, you have an optional avocado if you want to put it in there. I love that with the vegetable versions of it. It's certainly not traditional with the seafood versions, but hey, you might like it, okay? A little bit of chopped white onion and then some lime to squeeze on, because these big caldos are not complete without a squeeze of lime in them. For the salad, you'll need your salad greens. I'm going to use romaine and arugula with some sliced radishes in there. But for the dressing, which is the thing that I'm really going to talk to you about tonight, you'll need to have your garlic and a jalapeno chili. You could use serrano for this or any other kind of small hot green chili for it. And then you'll need to have olive oil or vegetable oil, and you will need to have some kind of cream. It can be anything from sour cream straight out of the container to creme fraiche or Mexican crema. Any of those will work. Again, a handful of cilantro is going to go in there, and you'll have a really delicious and a very unusual direction to go for this beautiful salad dressing. Okay, so to get us started here, I am going to start with the garlic and the jalapeno for the making of the dressing. The reason for that is that we've got to get it cooked and we've got to get it cooled. So the jalapeno needs to be cut up. And by the way, for those of you that are not interested in spicy salad dressings, I think it works really well in this situation, but you may not. You're going to want to cut it open and then take all the white veins out, more than the seeds. The white veins are going to want to come out like that. And you'll go on both sides of it. I'm using a pretty big knife here for it, but you might want to reach over and grab a small paring knife for this kind of thing. But remember, all of the real hot part of the chili is in those white veins. The seeds are buried in the white veins, and then cut up the jalapeno and put it over in a bowl with the head of garlic that's peeled. Now, a normal head of garlic will have anywhere from 10 to 12 cloves in it. So you want to put those all together in a microwave-safe dish, and we're going to cover that with some water. At the same time, we could just microwave the rest of the garlic that's going to go in the other dish. Now, if you haven't cooked along with me before and you think that this is a crazy thing to be microwaving garlic, this goes toward what is either roasted garlic in Mexico, and I'm just choosing some simple things so we can all cook together here. But instead of doing the 15-minute roast of it, I'm going to do a quick blanch of it in the microwave. For me, microwave is the fastest way to get that really strong garlicky flavor out. Now, if you love that flavor, then you don't even have to do this part except for the dressing. The garlic has to be completely cooked through for the dressing. So I'm just going to walk over to the sink and put some, it can just be cold water in this case, and over both of these. And then we are going to put this in here. Each one of those needs about a minute to cook. I'm going to put a minute and a half on here, and then I'm going to come back and look at it. Well, we've got to get them blanched and then the dressing completely cooled down before we go on with the rest of this whole thing here. Okay, so let's talk about questions and answers, because to me that's a really important part of why we're doing this live. Not only do we get a chance to cook together, hang out together in the kitchen, but you get the opportunity to ask me questions either about the recipe as it's going along or about anything else. And I welcome all kinds of questions. Now, those are not going to be live questions as in you're going to talk directly to me. You got to talk to me through the chat. Okay, so if you have questions, and I hope you have questions, because a little bit later on we're going to be having these the soup simmering away, and we're going to have a lot of time to kind of hang out together and talk back and forth. So we can do that through the chat. So I've got Kevin over here monitoring the chat. So he will be reading the questions to me, and he will be managing all of that. I apologize if we don't get to all the questions. I hope we will get to all of them, but we'll do our very best during the time that we have together. Okay, so let's turn on the pot that you need for making the soup. So this is a 4-quart pot, sort of a big normal pot that you probably have in your kitchen. And let's put that over about a medium heat here. And you'll notice that I have 2 pots going here because while you're making one, I'm going to be making 2. Hopefully that will slow me down. I have a tendency to be a pretty fast cook. And so hopefully that'll slow me down enough that you won't feel like you're playing catch up all the time to what I'm doing. I heard the buzzer for the garlic here. Let's just take a look at this and see what the consistency of this is. It's still hard. Okay, you know, when you put stuff in a microwave, and the more you put in there, the longer time it's going to take. And that's why I put it at about 1.5 minutes. This group of garlic doesn't need to be it just needs to be blanched. So take that strong garlic flavor away. But this one needs to be really, really soft. So I'm going to put 45 seconds more on that, and hopefully that will be enough for us for the garlic to get really soft here. So why did I heat the pans up? Why am I heating the pans up now before I've put anything in there? Because the next step will go much better. Now, I don't want the pan to get too hot. That's why I'm putting it over about a medium heat here. But let's go on to talk about the soup base. Now, I said that this is a recipe that's based on Caldo de Siete Mares, the 7 seas soup, but the soup doesn't really do it justice because this is sort of like a seafood stew, but when we think of stew, we think of something that's thick. So it's brothy, but it's chock full of all kinds of things that we really love to eat. So this is a beautiful warming dish for the winter time, and that's why I thought we would start off with it. And during these cooking lives, the point of it is that I can give you all kinds of possibilities. So I'm going to try to think of really iconic dishes that can be interpreted in different ways and then send that to you ahead of time. You can see what you really seem to like or have a chance to take a look at and think that's part of one of the things you want to have in your repertoire, and choose to cook one of them. Also, I wanted to give you lots of vegetarian options because people seem to like those vegetarian options. If you're vegetarian or if you cook for vegetarians regularly, you're going to have some great options with that. Let's take a look at these guys now, and it's hot. Okay. I will show you what I'm looking for when I press on it. I want to be able to actually press all the way down into it, even though it was really hot when I did that. Okay, so that means that it's tender now. So our next thing that we're going to do is to drain it, and we just want to cool this off to room temperature. That is really essential with this dressing here. I have a plate here that I'm just going to spread these out on so that they will cool quickly. And that will lead us on to the next. Okay, so we're going to make the base of this Seven Seas soup, or whatever version of it you're making. And we're going to make it with roasted tomatoes and chipotle chilies. But chipotle chilies are not necessarily the what everybody would turn to in Mexico. This might have a little chipotle in it, but mostly what it would have in it would be guajillo chilies. And so those of you that are like really into authentic cooking and you want yours to taste just like it would in Veracruz, say, then you'll probably want to toast some of these guajillo chilies and soak them ahead of time, about 20 or 30 minutes, and then blend them with the tomatoes. We're going to sidestep that and make this all about the smoky sweetness of a chipotle chili. So remember, I'm making 2 batches of all of this. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is to put the garlic that's been blanched in here. And I will add the can of tomatoes, or in my case, 2 cans of tomatoes. And then you want to put, you could do as little as 1 chili in this, but I would suggest 2 chilies. It'll make it, I think, properly spicy. So for me, I'm talking here about 4 of these chilies are going to go in with the 2 cans of chipotle. Now that'll make it kind of spicy, but so judge how spicy you like things. And then I'm going to put about a couple of tablespoons of this canning liquid, one of my favorite parts in all of this. I'm going to throw that guy back up over there and get rid of our cans down here. Now, the chipotle chilies are going to give it smokiness, as I said. And let's put this all in the blender and put the top on it. If you've got a food processor, perfectly fine to do this in a food processor. I'm going to turn this on, and I want to make it almost a smooth puree. So I'm starting a little slow, and now I'm going to turn it up. We really have soft things here, so it won't take very long at all for this to get quite smooth. You'll check yours. Maybe this is the best way to think about checking it, is just to rub some through your fingers there. And if you don't notice that it has very many little particulate pieces in there, then you're ready to go. Okay, let's go back over here to our pans. They're both sort of equally hot here. And I'm going to film them with oil. This can be vegetable oil or olive oil. And I want to put just enough to cover the base of these pans. Just enough to cover it nicely. And then I'm going to pour some of the mixture. I probably got that a little bit too hot. But if you have a hot pan like that to cook in, what you'll notice is that the cooking will go quickly, as this is really, it is cooking down to the consistency of, say, like a tomato paste. And so that's what we're trying to do. We don't ever want to lose the boil on this at all. I'm not sure I divided it very evenly here, so I'm going to take a spoon and take a little scoop or 2 out of this one and put it over here. And my next thing to do, which is my tendency here, is to have a spatter. So I'm going to clean up the little mess that I made over here. Now, during this time when it is cooking down, I'm actually going to turn the fire up a little bit now so that it'll keep that strong boil going here. During this time that it is cooking down, you don't have to stir it constantly, but the more you stir it, the faster this thing will go. So it's nice to keep it pretty constant simmer here. Now, I'm going to be using, for the seafood version of this, I'm going to be using mussels and shrimp to make it. You just have to know that you can use any kind of seafood that you like. I like to put mussels or clams into the seafood stew that I make with chicken broth because the mussels or clams will release their flavor into that chicken broth. And it's a very, very quick way to have a really delicious seafood soup that you haven't started with a fish stock. I know for most of you, probably fish stock is not something that you have in your pantry. It's not easy to get. I know that when I'm cooking in Mexico, there's several versions of the fish stock that you can buy in UHT containers just like this. They bring it in from Spain, and it's gorgeous. It makes making a paella, say, really, really fast, or a seafood soup really, really fast. But we don't tend to have those in our grocery stores in the United States. So I start with chicken stock, and then I almost always will be adding some kind of bivalve, like a clam or a mussel, to open up and release their juice into that chicken stock and make it taste a little bit more like it is a fish stock. Okay. Now, if you don't like any of those things, you can just use some fish and put that, chop up some fish and put it in here. It'll be delicious. I like shrimp. I like a variety of things. And most people will tell you on the Gulf Coast that the greater variety that goes in here, the more delicious it will be at the end. I'm not using calamares here. They love those in Mexico, but at the same time, they will take a lot longer to cook. So I wanted something that could be cooked really fast here. Okay, now I'm down to what I need to be. Sorry about that. Okay, so I am going to show you what this looks like here. I hope that yours is getting cooked down too. But as I stir around here, I can see the bottom of the pot really easily. And if you let that cool off, it would be about the consistency of tomato paste. So now we are going to add to this our broth. In this one, which will be our seafood version of it, we will put in chicken broth. And then I have the vegetable broth for the other ones. Maybe you have your favorite brands of these. Some of them are really different than others, especially when it comes to vegetable broth. Some of them taste a whole lot more like root vegetables, which you may or may not like. Some of them will taste a lot more like carrot, I've noticed. So you have to kind of figure that part out for yourself and choose a brand that you like. Okay, so we've got our two here. I'll keep these here so that you don't forget which one, and I don't forget which one is which. And while these are coming to a boil, if you have a top, this just means it'll go faster. If you have a top for your pan, then go ahead and put it on the pan, and we'll let that come to a simmer now while we are working on the potatoes here. Okay, so these are sort of normal size boiling potatoes. And I'm going to cut them up in a very specific way. You can cut them up however you feel like, but the more even the pieces are, the more even the cooking. So that you won't have some that are just falling apart and others that aren't cooked yet. So I'm just going to show you the way that I would do it here. I'm not a big one for peeling a lot of things unless they have to be peeled. But I just roll it over, sort of squaring it up, and then cut the two ends off. I'll do another one just like that to show you how I do that. This means that I'm going to get more square pieces, and it takes a little bit of the peel off of it. Either end. Now, the difference between boiling potatoes and baking potatoes is really great. When you're talking about baking potatoes, they're the ones that are grown in Idaho typically, and they have a very mealy texture to them. That's what we love in a baked potato. It absorbs a whole lot of good stuff like the sour cream and the butter and so forth. It also is a good potato if you like really light and fluffy mashed potatoes. You would use that Idaho baking potato. They're only really grown in the United States. They are not grown in a lot of European countries or in Central or South America. But the kind that is grown in most other places is a waxy boiling potato. And that is what I have here. I always say like the red skin ones because most people know what those red skin boiling potatoes are like, but there's many different varieties of them. A number of years ago, a new variety of potato hit the grocery stores, and that's one that's sort of halfway between that floury starchiness of an Idaho baker and the waxiness of a boiling potato, and that's the Yukon Gold. So it's kind of an all-purpose potato. Maybe you've fallen in love with it. A lot of people have. I think it makes really great mashed potatoes. I'm not so wild about it as a baked potato. I still, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to use the Idaho bakers. So I'm just now cutting mine into half-inch pieces here. For these potatoes, that's 3 cuts across that direction, and then 1 cut across this direction, and then cutting it this way 3 times. Okay, so that gives me nice little cubes. They'll cook relatively at the same time. So as this is not yet to a boil, I'll just move that guy over there. And I'm going to put these potatoes into the pot, knowing that that was going to take some time to do. I have already chopped up the potatoes for the other one there. And let's talk about what else would go in here at this time with the potatoes for our vegetable version of it. I don't know if you're like me, but I'm wild about parsnips. Carrots would be your go-to here, but parsnips have a really lovely flavor as far as I'm concerned. And I would treat it sort of in the same way that I did the potato by squaring it off like that and then cutting that into smaller pieces. It will take about the same amount of time as the cooking of the potato. I don't know if all of you have had parsnips very much. I tell you, it's one of my favorite roasted vegetables because I think it has this beautiful sweetness to it. And in addition to the sweetness, there is, I don't know, it's a hard to describe flavor that is really, really wonderful. But the sweetness really comes out when you see that as a roasted, or have that as a roasted vegetable. I'm going to put a carrot in here as well, and I'm just do the same kind of thing. Cutting it into smaller pieces is pretty hard, so it can go into slightly smaller pieces, and then cut that across. Okay.
Are you washing the vegetables first?
Yes. So the question was, am I washing all these vegetables first? Yes. All of those things. I'm not much on the peeling of them, partly because I think it takes away some of their flavor and some of their nutrients. And so for me, it's the best thing is to just sort of cut off some of the skin and leave other skin. We all sort of have that thing about potatoes. A lot of us love the potato skin. So I kind of cut off some of it and leave some of it on there. I've got more of this parsnip here, and I can just do it the way that I did the carrot there. But you really do need to wash the vegetables before you start with it. I have a tendency to buy all organic vegetables, which means that they're not typically sprayed with a lot of insecticides, pesticides during the growing process. And so they're going to be clean of those kinds of things, but they're not clean of dirt. So I suggest that you just wash everything off. Okay, now we've got everything in that's going to need to cook for some time here. So we do all of that in there, put the tops back on, and they're about to come to a simmer now. So it's going to take us about 15 minutes to cook that. So just set a timer for that. I'm going to set my timer over here just so that I will remember when it's been on for 15 minutes, and we will move on now to making the dressing and talking about the salad ingredients and so forth here. Okay, let's see if these are cool. My guess is they're completely at room temperature now. So I would suggest, if you have a blender, to do this in a blender. You know, I'm wild about the blender because the blades go so much faster than they do on a food processor. You can achieve this in a food processor. You'll just have to go probably a little slower than what I'm going to be going with this now. So I have this short, which I always recommend to anybody that gets a Vitamix blender, that you get 2 cups to go with it. One's the regular one that comes with it, and one is a smaller one, which works for smaller batches of things. Like this dressing will be a smaller batch of things. So I'm going to put these guys into this blender jar, and then I'm going to put the top on and just do an initial chop. If you're doing this in a food processor, just pulse it a few times. You may want to stop the thing and scrape down the sides just so that everything gets sort of chopped evenly in this initial chopping part here. And then we're going to keep that going a little bit longer. And now I'm going to start adding the oil to it, but I have to use a measured amount of oil for this. Again, olive oil or vegetable oil will work for this. Half a cup is going to go in here. I'm going to put just a little bit of it in here now. And now I'm going to stop it and scrape down the sides so that I can make sure that all of the garlic. If you've never made anything like this, and this may seem really crazy to you that I'm using all this garlic, but once you have cooked the garlic like that, it becomes really sweet and it becomes the emulsifier. So essentially what we're making here is a mayonnaise with no egg in it. It just is emulsified with the gorgeous garlic that is in there. Top back. Oh, I'm not going to put the top back on it. Okay. Now I'm going to turn up the speed a little bit more here. And I'm going to put the rest of the oil in now. Now, those of you that have made mayonnaise before know that I would have been doing exactly the same thing, but I would have had an egg in there to emulsify with. But do you see what it looks like there? It looks like a mayonnaise, like a very light mayonnaise. Okay, I'm going to see if that was enough for that. Here we go. Yeah, it's looking pretty good here. Let me show you what it looks like. See, it looks just like a light mayonnaise. You see a little bit of oil separation out of it, but not much. Okay. Now we have the rest of the ingredients to go into this as well. And it reminds me of the fact that, you know, I never salted this soup, and I think it's a good thing to salt this soup when you've got it going with the potatoes, because that way the potatoes will absorb some of the salt and they'll come out tasting really seasoned. So I'm going to put a measured amount in here, a teaspoon, and then we'll taste it later and see if it needs more. It all depends on the saltiness of your broth. But most of these broths that are commercially made are not very salty. So we're going to start with what I would consider the absolute minimum amount, which would be a teaspoon in each one of those things. So you'll want to do that as well. Okay, tops will go back on these guys here. And we'll let them keep moving along here. Okay, back to finishing our dressing. And our dressing needs crema in it. This is like a homemade sour cream that we use at our restaurant. So I'm going to put this in here. And then a little bit of lime juice can be squeezed in here as well. And I've got my Mexican lime juicer to do that squeezing with. This is sort of to taste. It'll take about 2 tablespoons, I think. And then I'm going to give it just a little bit. 2 tablespoons is about what I get out of a large lime, half. There. Okay. And then I'll give it a little initial amount of salt here. And I've got some cilantro over here that I'm just going to tear off about what I would call a handful of cilantro, about that much. Just tear the stems off of the end of it there, and then roughly chop it. This is not a fine chop like you usually see me do. This is just a rough chop to help these get put back into the mixture fast without clogging in the blades at all. And then top goes back on. And now I can put this back in to keep any spattering from coming up. And then we'll just blend it really well. So we're looking for this to be creamy and smooth. Let's just see what that looks like now. That looks really nice. Okay, so it looks like green goddess dressing. That's kind of what the consistency that we're going for there. And I'm going to give it a taste. And see if we need to have more salt. We do. Now here's the deal. If a dressing does not taste salty, it will not season all the greens that it's going on. It will fall flat. So you want to season your dressing until it has a sense of saltiness when you put it. You shouldn't be able to eat a spoonful of dressing off of a spoon without cringing something, because it's the big flavoring for everything that you're doing here. So now I've got that little bit of saltiness, a little too much acid. It should make you pucker just a little bit, and that will be that. Okay, now we are finished with our dressing here and ready to talk about questions from you guys. So that's where I'm leaving this. I think I'm going to leave all of this right here right now, and then we'll talk about your questions. So do I have anything that I...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sean Bassett wanted to know why you might fry with a dry chili, why you might fry it versus dry roast then rehydrate it.
The question is, why with a dried chili would you sometimes fry it or dry toast it? It creates a very different flavor. And cooks in Mexico argue about this all the time. There are some people that say you cannot make a great mole unless you fry the chilies. Then in the next state over, they may say you can't make a great mole if you fry the chilies. They have to be dry toasted. It creates quite a different flavor. So it's a flavor thing. Once they are toasted, either what we call oil toasting in our restaurant or a dry toasting in our restaurant, they need to be rehydrated. And usually that shouldn't be too long. I will say for most home cooks that probably you want to do that for about 20 to 30 minutes. And even if you're not going to use them right away, drain the water off of them. Now, there's that whole controversy as to whether you should use that water or not. I typically don't use the water because I think it makes a cleaner, brighter flavor in the dish, but a lot of cooks would tell you, no, you always use the soaking water. It seems kind of weird to throw it away, right? But at the same time, if it's got bitterness to it, replacing it with water is probably going to help your dish. It's not going to taste so strongly bitter, and there's always natural bitterness in a dried chili. So that toasting thing is a matter of flavor and what you're going for. And sometimes I like to dry toast, and sometimes I like to fry, just to get different kinds of flavors.
If
Yes.
someone is doing the chicken recipe, when should they add it, or should they cook it ahead of time?
No, you should add it. You should have added it already. So put it in the pot now, okay? It takes about the same amount of time as cooking those potatoes. So you've cubed up the chicken, and I prefer chicken thighs for this. That will take you the sort of the 20 minutes of cooking time. If you're using chicken breast, then actually now would be the perfect time to add it because it's not going to take nearly as much time as the chicken thigh. So dark meat takes longer to cook, white meat takes much, much less and can dry out quickly, so you want to put it in closer to the end of the cooking. Other questions?
Can you substitute Oaxacan pasilla for the chipotle?
Now that's a question that I like to hear here. That says that you're right in wavelength with me. It would be absolutely fabulous to use the Oaxacan pasilla, which is a smoke dried chili that's sort of reminiscent of a chipotle. And you could substitute one for the other and it would make it really delicious. You get more sweetness out of the Oaxacan pasilla. So if you have Oaxacan pasilla, yes, but you will need to lightly toast that dry. It's not already rehydrated. Toast it dry and then put it into hot tap water and let it soak for about 20 minutes before blending it with the fire roasted tomatoes. Other questions?
What wine do you recommend pairing with this?
Yes. I really love wine with food, okay? And I think a lot about pairing things. So I'm really grateful to hear the question about pairing wine here. A full-bodied white would be really great with this, but not one that is too minerally or too like chalky dry. Because there's a lot of stuff going on in this soup that is sort of tips toward the sweet edge of things, because tomatoes, once they get cooked down like that, become sweeter. That garlic that has been blanched will become sweeter. So I would say with this, my go-to would be Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. Now, I'm specifying New Zealand because that has all the tropical notes to it, as well as some of the citrus flavors. Whereas if you get the Sauvignon Blanc from France, say, it can be incredibly minerally, and it's all about those bright, tart flavors. That's not going to be perfect with this. You need something that's a little bit rounder than that. Certainly, California Sauvignon Blanc could be really good because they tend to have some of the tropical notes, but the best by far, and very widely available, those New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs are just absolutely amazing.
Do you have thoughts about using pressure cooker or an Instant Pot for soups?
I love my Instant Pot. I use it for all different kinds of things. This particular one, I wouldn't bother to get it out for because this cooks way too fast. But if I were making the beef version of this soup, which is sort of like mole de olla, where you're going to have to cook it for quite a long time, an Instant Pot would be a dream. Like when I make chicken stock, I always make it in the Instant Pot. I always brown the bones using the saute feature on there. Brown the bones, some onions, perhaps some carrot and celery if I happen to have those things around. Put some herbs in there, fill it up with water, give it a dash of white wine if I happen to have any of that on hand, and then put it on for 1 full hour. And it makes absolutely amazing chicken stock really fast. But for making something as simple as this, I think probably just doing this short cooking time is going to be fine, because we're already starting with our vegetable stock or our chicken stock here. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not leading you very well today. We have to put some herbs in here. Okay, so if you're using epazote, it should already be in this pot. Okay, so epazote, let me show you if you haven't ever used epazote before. What do you look for if you go to the Mexican grocery store? This is what it looks like. It's a jagged leaf herb. And it's typically, so it's got a very thick stalk on it here. And so usually what people do in Mexico is simply throw it into the pot here like that. They don't chop this herb very much. Let that simmer a little bit more there. And this one looks like it's coming along very nicely. I'm going to put another one in there. Now, if you're using cilantro, you have 2 options here. You can wait till the very end to put it in here, or you can add it twice, once at the beginning and once at the end. So you could throw a big handful of cilantro in there now. I would cut off these tough bases of it and put it in there. And that will give you a flavor that you will not recognize as cilantro, but it's sweet and it's robust. Most people have never tasted a lot of cilantro simmered into a soup, because everybody thinks it loses its flavor. Well, it doesn't. It just transforms into something else. Whereas the epazote, you want it to be in there for quite a little bit longer. If you've got other herbs that you like, those could go into the pot. Maybe if they're tender herbs like basil that you want to put in there, put it in there now, and then put a little bit more in at the very end to give you that fresh flavor of it, of the basil, say, that you're going to put in there. Okay, I'm open to other questions if we have some.
Can this be done with a verde style stock?
So that would mean that we are going to be doing this as a sort of an unusual soup. In Mexico, they don't typically do a verde style on many of the soups, and I'll tell you one of the reasons. It's not completely true that you would never see it that way, but it's not going to be something that you would see frequently. And the reason for it is it can be too acidic. So the verde would come from tomatillos. So you would actually have to roast the tomatillos ahead of time or cook them in some way. My typical way of doing it is to roast them, not boil them, but some cooks prefer doing the boiled version, but you would have to do that, and you would just need to have a couple cups of cooked that you're going to substitute for the tomatoes that we put in this one. It will be good, but remember, it will be very tart. That's why when you see these kinds of things, they will often have a creaminess to them, meaning just simply add some cream, or not necessarily sour cream for this, because sour cream would be curdly. It have a tendency to curdle in it. But just regular heavy cream would be good in it, or some people would blend in pumpkin seeds. And then that'll give you a creamy texture without adding any dairy product. And you would just put the pumpkin seeds, toasted pumpkin seeds, the kind that you can buy in the snack aisle, into the blender along with the tomatillos, the garlic, and the chipotle chilies, or a green chili if you wanted to go the green chili route.
We also have some questions about epazote. Is it okay to use dried or frozen, or what would you recommend as a substitute?
Thank you so much for asking about different forms of epazote. So in Mexican cooking, the fresh epazote is used. I've never seen frozen anywhere. You would have to probably find it and freeze it yourself. I'll tell you another option to that. I'm not sure that would be, I haven't done it, so I can't tell you exactly what I would think about that. But let's go to the difference between dried, which you can find in every Mexican market, and fresh. Dried is a medicinal herb, and it is mostly the stalks of the epazote that are dried out. And they have a high concentration of the elements in the epazote that people want to make a tea out of for certain maladies, okay? That's not a culinary use. That is a medicinal use. And every kind of epazote you will find hanging in the dried, with all the dried herbs and stuff, is intended to be made into a tea for medicinal uses. When you see epazote fresh, it is used in things like cooking the beans or in a soup stock like this one, but it's not necessarily going to be the right thing to use the dried in, okay? I would just say never do it. You'll never get the flavor out of it. I would go the cilantro route, honestly, if I was going to not have any epazote. And it's delicious with cilantro. It's really delicious. We just made it this soup with it last week, and it was absolutely delicious, especially because you could put some more of it on the top, which I'm going to do in this. Let's go on to finish what we've got going here. We've had our 15 minutes. So let's uncover our pots here. And we are going to add to the vegetable one this zucchini. This is the Mexican zucchini, light-skinned. It's in every Mexican market here in Chicago. I hope you live in a place where it's also readily available. But I'm going to add, I cut up a couple of them. I'm going to add that now to the pot. And we'll let those simmer for about 5 minutes or so will be enough to cook that. And while we're letting that go, we are going to put in our mussels. Now, mussels come pretty clean nowadays. They didn't used to. When I was a kid, you had to scrub every mussel. And they came with these, what we called beards on them. It was basically the way that the mussel attached to the rope that it was cultivated on. And you look at it and you would have to pull on it and get it all out because it was very unpleasant to eat. So scrubbing, pulling the beards off of them. And now we get really clean mussels. So I will tell you that I looked through all of these. I rinsed them off, but I didn't really scrub them or anything. And they're just super clean. Now, a lot of people want to know about, can you tell if a mussel is good enough to eat? I've let these sit out for a little while. They were really tightly closed and they've set out and started to move toward not good now. But one of the things you can do with your mussels is to tap them. You see it closed up completely. I mean, it really closed up tight. I've got another one here. Let's see what this one does. See if this one, you can get this one. See, it just closed up completely. That means that it's still very lively. Now, if it won't do that, I would discard it before I even start here. But we're going to take these mussels and slide them into this pot over here. This is sort of to me, the magic of what happens here. So I love that these open up so fast and they will infuse this broth with so much flavor. Of course, no mussels. You could use clams for this. I'm not the biggest clam fan because I think that the meat of the mussel is a little bit just more delicious to me. And the texture of the mussels is a little bit more delicious to me as well. So we are going to turn that pot up a little bit now. Let's just stir around in this vegetable one and see what we've got here. It's about time for me to give it a little bit of a taste and see where we are flavor-wise now. I'm so glad that I put that parsnip in there because I can taste it. I think it's just really delicious. If you haven't worked with parsnip, I suggest that you try that because I think you're going to really like it a lot. It adds another flavor profile to your cooking. And then once these have opened up, I'm going to add the shrimp. I typically will cook shrimp for a very short period of time. 2 minutes or something like that is usually enough. These are peeled and deveined. These have been deveined by machine, so they're not going to butterfly up. But if you were one of those people that wanted to do a a big butterfly so that they look really dramatic, then you just cut down the back and open it up like that. Sometimes when I do the deveining it myself, because the vein is right here at the top, when I do that deveining by myself, I'll just cut it down like that so that they open up. They'll expand out and they'll look really, really beautiful. Let me rinse my knife off here. Now that I've done it, I have used it for the seafood. And I'm going to chop up some white onion and get that ready for our garnish here. So I'm going to cut down through it, showing you my style. You know, it was very interesting that I was recently reading different people's approach to cutting onions, and I have my own style, and it's not what they teach in culinary school, and I always feel bad about that. But I really don't like that style that they use in culinary school because it involves these horizontal cuts through the onion, which I think are really awkward and very difficult to do. So what I do is I'm going to cut more of the top and bottom off of this because I've got a little bit of the root on there. So I want to get that done. And then I cut across the onion at whatever size I want the pieces to be widthwise. And once I get all the way to the other end, then I use the structure of the onion to help me cut little cubes out of it. So I'm coming down almost horizontal here like that. And you can see that then you can get, as you get more vertical with your knife, and when I get to about there, then I tip it over and I start that same thing again. And at the end, when I get to the end like that, I lost a couple of pieces that I saw on both sides there, and those can just be chopped by a quick rock and chop back and forth. Now this is going to be our garnish, because in Mexico you would always get a plate. Almost with every soup that you have, you would get a plate that would contain white onion, cilantro, and limes. These are the main seasonings that you would put into your soup. But they almost always will rinse the onion off after they have chopped it, and that deflames it. Now, I didn't come up with that word deflame. It actually, my translation from the Spanish, desflemar, which is to rinse off the strong aroma, that stuff that makes you your eyes water. It can cause your stomach to be upset. It's the stuff that can give you like onion breath. You create it when you cut into an onion. You bring two elements together by breaking cell walls that creates a sulfurous compound. And you created it and you can get rid of it. All you have to do is to rinse it off. So I'm going to put that there. Let's take a look at our mussels now and see if they're beautiful. Okay, I'm going to turn it down now. Turn both of these guys down. I'm going to put the shrimp in. Now they're going to need to be put down in here because they're going to sit up on top of those mussels. So just put them, nestle them down in here. Looks like we had really perfect mussels. These were just ones that we got at the grocery store here. But they're all open and looking really beautiful there. So I'm going to turn this off now, and you could let it simmer for a couple minutes if you wanted to, but I'm afraid it's going to take me a couple minutes to get back to it. So I'm actually going to turn that one off completely. The other one, the zucchini, if it's ready, I'm going to keep that off as well. So a little taste of this zucchini. Oh, I can tell. I don't even have to taste it. It's what I like. It's done all the way through, but it still has a little bit of crunch left in it, so I like that part of it. Now, let's do a little bit of lime here. One thing that a lot of people do when they're cutting limes is to cut them in a way that doesn't allow your guests or the people around your table to be able to get as much juice out of them as possible. So I like to cut them across the equator, and then from there, I like to cut them this way so that you are leaving as absolute much of that exposed part as possible. A lot of people will not cut across the equator first. They will cut it pole to pole and then cut around that. That traps all of the lime juice in there with sheaths around it. This exposed all of the sheaths. You're cutting through them, and it makes them easier for people to squeeze on. We've got our cilantro there. And now let's talk about an avocado. So when you get this soup in the Gulf Coast of Mexico, when you say you're in the port of Veracruz and you take a little trip down south outside of town to Boca del Rio, which is this beautiful, beautiful little town sprawling across a little cliff that goes down to the mouth of a river. When you go down to this place, you will find just one after another of these little restaurants, and all of them will be serving sopa or caldo de siete mares. They will not put an avocado in there, okay? It's just not part of it. But when I make this as a vegetarian version, I love the avocado in it. So I'm going to open this guy up. Oh, that moment when you twist the two sides apart and hope that there's not a lot of blemishes there. And then I am going to cut, I'm using the tough skin of the Hass avocado here. So I'm very lightly cutting down through it in cubes, and that'll allow me to get them onto the soup very easily. Okay, now before we serve those guys, I think it's time to put together a salad to go with this. I think this is the kind of salad I would want to have here. And I'm going to do it out of romaine with the baby arugula that you can find in lots and lots of grocery stores these days. I love that baby arugula, and I love what it does to a plain romaine salad. So you cut the end of this is romaine hearts, by the way. You cut that off, and then I'm going to cut it about 1/2-inch pieces all the way down, and then just open those guys up like that. And I got some radishes. This could go in there. If you happen to have some jicama, that's also really delicious to thin slice in here. Cucumbers. There's all different kinds of things that you could choose to add a little bit of crunch to your salad. But I also like the look of nice radish slices mixing in here. I'm going to do one more because I think it could easily take it. I don't know what kind of greens you guys have for a salad, but let's take a look at our dressing over there. If it has separated it at all, then you'll need to either, well, like I would store this in the refrigerator in a jar so that I could just shake it when I bring it out and get it re-emulsified. But now that I have it in here, let me see. Yeah, it's just got a tiny little bit of oil separation on the top. So I have to have the right lid for this one. So I'll put that there, and I'll come back here and there we go. All right. Now, the way I like to dress a salad, and I learned this a number of years ago, and I think that it's something that's worth sharing with everybody. If you like a salad to be evenly, lightly coated, then start by putting your dressing all the way around the edge of the bowl, okay? And when you think you have about enough, but not quite enough, let me just rinse these guys off here. Then start turning your salad in this bowl. And as you turn it, you will be starting to coat some of the greens on the outside with the dressing. And this will give you the most even coating of dressing. I know most people just pour it right in the middle of the salad and turn and start trying to mix it in. But it's always clumped if it's done that way. But you see how just turning it, you have to know how to turn it that way. But just turning it like that evenly coats it. Then I always give it a taste. If my dressing's not quite salty enough, then I'll just put a light coating of salt on there. You might like to have pepper on it. For me, I'm happy with it just like that. I'm going to put this into this beautiful bowl. A lot of times people ask me questions about some of the serving pieces that I use here, and I will tell you that they are things that I have collected all the years I lived in Mexico, as well as on my frequent visits there for well over 40 years. And this piece is from Tlaxcala. It's Talavera from Tlaxcala. Such one of the most beautiful Talaveras. This comes from the Corona factory. And I love the look of it because I love this mustard color that is really their hallmark in that factory. Okay, now it's time for us to serve our soup and do the finishing garnishes on it. Let's do the vegetable one first. I should really give these a taste before I do that. So let's see. It's really close with that teaspoon of salt. I will say that it probably will perk up the flavors to do just a little bit more. So I'm going to put a couple of big ladles full of the soup there. Now, since this is the one that is vegetarian, I'm going to scoop out, and this is something that, I diced it in here. I'm going to do about half of this half here and sprinkle this over the top. It's a really lovely creaminess that adds something special. Here, we'll do a little bit of chopped onion on that. And then maybe some just leaves of cilantro on this one. Tear them apart like that. And then what I would normally do is cut a little stripe in that one. And then we've got there one of our soups here. Now, the next one is going to be our seafood version of this. And, oh man, it smells so good. And I'm really glad that I turned off the fire because those shrimp are just perfectly cooked now. I really love that. So a little bit more of the broth on there. And for this one, no avocado in my way of thinking, but definitely some of our deflamed white onion and some of the leaves of cilantro. You could take, if you have your epazote, you could chop that up. Chop the leaves up finely like we would chop cilantro and sprinkle that over. Just know it's a much stronger, in my way of thinking, a much stronger herb than cilantro is. And so I'm just going to sprinkle those guys over there. We're missing probably the most important thing here, which would be the lime in this one. So I'll take another piece of the lime and put that over here on the side of the bowl. So I told you where the first bowl for the salad was. That's from Tlaxcala, from the Corona Talavera factory. And these are just market pieces. You can buy them in lots of markets around Mexico. These, actually, I don't know where they were made because I bought them in Chicago, down in Pilsen at the famous old grocery store down there that's called Casa del Pueblo. Really, if you haven't been down there, if you visit Chicago, please go visit Casa del Pueblo. It's been there for, I think, about 60 or 70 years now, and it's just one of the absolute best places to buy Mexican ingredients as well as pottery and stuff like that. It's a grocery store, but they have pottery and that sort of thing. Okay, so we have now completed the dishes that we have for today. I hope you've enjoyed these so far. And I'm ready for more questions.
We're close on time. The last questions we have for you. There is an 11-year-old fan out there.
I love it.
They would love to know, when did you know when you wanted to cook?
So, to my 11-year-old fan that's out there, first of all, thank you so much for being here. When I was 11 years old, I was watching every cooking show that I could find. And back in those days, there were only one or two. And so, but I loved those, and they really opened my world to all different kinds of cooking. And I really appreciate that. So thank you for being here and listening. I grew up in a restaurant, and I had the opportunity to cook all the time. I just hung out in my family's restaurant, and the prep cooks would put me to work doing different things. When I got to be about your age, I got to start moving into the line and doing some things on the line, and I just loved it. I knew that I wanted to cook from a very early age. However, saying that, I didn't go straight into it. I went to college and I studied Spanish language, literature, and Latin American studies. Then I went to graduate school and I studied anthropology and linguistics. And that gave me all the background that I needed to be able to delve into Mexico and its cuisine in a really, really deep way. But I never lost my love for cooking through all of that, and then finally decided to put my love for Mexico and its culture together with my love for cooking, and decided to turn back into cooking, but to do it on my terms. So if you love cooking now, just don't give up. You never know when it will resurface again. Just keep cooking. And I think we have really gone past our time, but thank you for sticking with me now. Okay, so show us finished dishes. That's what I'm reading, a note that's being held up to me and reading it now. We want you guys to show us your finished dishes. You can do that on Facebook. You can do that on Instagram. Please put a hashtag on them, Live with Rick. If you don't mind doing that, we would really love it. Thank you for sticking with us through this first Cooking Live. It was really fun for me. I love being able to have a back and forth with you guys. We're going to do some of these back and forths with no food in front of us so that you'll have a chance to ask me about all kinds of things. But thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you so much for supporting our channel. It means the world to us. We really love it. And we really love having now the access to an interactive way of being with all of you. Thanks again, and enjoy cooking.